Alright guys, so unfortunately this is going to be a pretty solemn video here today because we lost a good one yesterday. Henry Kissinger, a very well-respected statesman and a influential foreign policy figure for decades and decades in this country, he unfortunately passed away yesterday. And so, I figured I'd do a little tribute video here with him and, what is that? What is that? What is happening? What? Okay. I don't know what that was. I don't know who put that there. That's not respectful. That's not cool. Who did that? Anyways, so I figured I would do a little bit of a recap on Henry Kissinger's legacy, because I'm anticipating that, I've already seen a couple versions of this, but I'm anticipating that over the next couple of days we're going to see probably some article written by like Barack Obama or other members of the legacy media that are going to come out and probably whitewash Henry Kissinger's legacy. So he lived to be 100 years old, which is, in my opinion, at least probably 100 years too long. I think that Henry Kissinger, while he was alive up until yesterday, probably had more blood on his hands than any other living human being on the face of the planet, at least maybe top 5, top 10. And so I figured it would be good to actually go through some of his legacy here. We're just going to barely scratch the surface, but just to sort of like not just, play the little crab song and do all that, but to actually understand what he did and why he and how he justified doing those things, so that we can try to prevent that from happening in the future, right? So here from the Huffington Post, they actually had a pretty decent article here. With the headline on this is just absolutely spot on. Henry Kissinger, America's most notorious war criminal, dies at 100. So that's how you write a headline there, right? There's no whitewashing here. There's no, oh, he was a respected statesman and all of that stuff. No, he's a war criminal. He's verifiably a war criminal. That's not even in question here, right? They start off saying that Henry Kissinger, who as a top American foreign policy official oversaw, overlooked, and at times actively perpetuated some of the most grotesque war crimes that the U.S. and its allies have committed, died Wednesday at the age of 100 years old. Kissinger, of course, served as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor under Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, positions that allowed him to direct the Vietnam War and the broader Cold War with the Soviet Union, and to implement a stridently realist approach that prioritized U.S. interests and domestic political success over any potential atrocity that may occur. So, listen, just to start off here, right? Henry Kissinger was not only obviously directly involved in like cabinet positions under Nixon and Gerald Ford, but he was also highly influential with presidents after that, right? Everybody from, George W. Bush to Bill Clinton to Obama to whoever the case may be. He's always been highly influential as sort of like a foreign policy thought leader or an advisor or a mentor to a lot of the politicians that we still have running the country to this day. Now, in terms of the realist approach, right? So basically, how I would basically characterize his approach to politics, right? Or foreign policy, right? His realist approach basically translates into, this man had no conscience, okay, when it came to his policy decision making. He viewed everything through the lens of how can this action either hurt or help perpetuating U.S. power around the world. How can it help us economically become more dominant? How can it help us militarily become more dominant? How can it help us geopolitically become more dominant? Fuck any semblance of morality as a part of that calculation. He did not believe in using morality or human rights or anything like that as a matter of calculation in terms of the foreign policy decisions that he was responsible for, to the point where, as they're going to mention in this article, where he could just entirely overlook, genocides of people, the mass slaughter of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that he was either responsible for or that he looked the other way for, that he helped to fund and to arm and to equip and to train and all of that. So he would just completely look the other way or directly participate in the slaughter of countless civilians in order to perpetuate what he saw was beneficial to the United States empire. So that's kind of how I would generally characterize somebody like Henry Kissinger, a man without a conscience. They continue here, though. They say, the former led to perhaps the most infamous crime that Kissinger committed, a secret 4-year bombing campaign in Cambodia, this was under Nixon, that killed an untold number of civilians, despite the fact that it was a neutral nation, or supposed to be a neutral nation, with which the United States was not at war. So, in terms of this secret 4-year bombing campaign, just to give you guys a little perspective here. Now, this isn't just that secret 4-year bombing campaign on Cambodia, which was supposed to be a neutral nation, but you can look at maps like this I mean, as pointed out here by Advatism, a map of the U.S. bombing of Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia, each black dot represents a 1,000 kilogram bomb. Okay, this is Henry Kissinger's legacy for you. And there's basically, like, in this entire region, like, almost no point on the map that was left spared. To the point where, even to this day, The Intercept actually just broke this. I think I covered it. It was a while ago. It was a couple months ago or something. And Ryan Grimm tweeted out again today as a reminder. But to the point where, to this day, we are still uncovering some of the untold atrocities that were committed in Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam. We're still getting files on some of the things that Henry Kissinger was responsible for in this region during that time period. It's also to the point where, still to this day, people in these countries are dying or having their limbs blown off, okay, innocent men, women, children, because of unexploded ordinances that were left behind as a result of this bombing campaign. Okay, I mean, look at this fucking map here, man. Just absolutely atrocious. Now, they continue here with a little bit more, examples. During his time in charge of the American foreign policy machine, Kissinger also directed illegal arms sales to Pakistan, which at the time was split between West Pakistan, East Pakistan, then became Bangladesh after these events. But he was basically involved in illegal arms sales to Pakistan, which was a military dictatorship at the time, as it carried out a brutal crackdown on its Bengali population in 1971. He supported the 1973 military coup that overthrew a democratically elected socialist government in Chile, Salvador Allende. He gave the go-ahead to Indonesia's 1975 invasion of East Timor, which many people call a genocide, and he also backed Argentina's repressive military dictatorship as it launched its dirty wars against dissenters and leftists in 1976. His policies during the Ford administration also fueled civil wars in Africa, most notably in Angola. So there's really no part of the world that he didn't have his hands on, right? South America, Central America, Africa, Southeast Asia, everywhere. Even the most generous calculations suggest that the murderous regimes that Kissinger supported and the conflicts that they waged were responsible for millions of deaths and millions of other human rights abuses during and after the 8 years that he served the American government. So, I mean, like, it was a multi-leveled thing here, right? He did, as we're going to touch on here in a second, directly facilitate the bombing of Cambodia. Like, he literally signed off on the airstrikes that were happening in Cambodia personally. Okay, so he was more responsible in, like, direct ways in, situations like that. But then he's also responsible for, like, decades of long-lasting destruction that people are still feeling to this day. When you go into a country and you destabilize it, or you assassinate their leader, or you support a military coup inside of that country, and then that military fascist right-wing government commits human rights abuses against the people, you're responsible for that, right? So, I mean, it's a multi-leveled thing in terms of the incalculable suffering that he was responsible for during his career. They also say that Kissinger never showed remorse for these misdeeds. He never paid any real price for them either. I mean, he should have been fucking in jail this entire time. This is the kind of guy who should have been behind prison bars. He maintained a mocking tone towards critics of his human rights record throughout his life, and remained a member in good standing of the elite Washington Political Society until his death. And here he is with that elite Washington Political Society. Here I believe this is Madeleine Albright, who, as a reminder, was somebody who said that it was totally acceptable for the United States and the West to starve out, through sanctions, Iraq, and kill upwards of 500,000 innocent children. She said that was totally fine and justifiable. Then we got Henry Kissinger, the big man himself here, and then we have, of course, Barack, drone strike civilians, Obama, sitting next to him as well. So, I mean, he's also, over the next couple of days, again, you are going to see some pieces that are written. You're going to see some media coverage that is going to try to whitewash his atrocities. But that's why it's important to read things like this, right? They say still others have argued that Kissinger was, in the words of New York Times essayist Thomas Meany, a far less remarkable figure than his supporters, his critics, and he himself believed. Rather than an outlier, Meany and others have suggested that Kissinger was a consummate political actor and a natural product of the American war machine, if one who had an outsized sense of self-importance, even compared with many of the other supposedly great men who have led the country before and after him. So, I mean, this is a point where, I'll leave it up to you guys and let me know what you think about this. Was Henry Kissinger, particularly as an individual, evil, and just a terrible guy who wanted to do bad things to people, or was he just a natural product of the American empire, right? Does maintaining an empire of this size and scale and maintaining economic power and military power and political power around the world in the way that the U.S. empire has, does that sort of just like make it inevitable that a guy like Henry Kissinger will come to power and make it inevitable that he's going to make those kinds of decisions that he made? I mean, I could see it both ways. I think it's kind of a mix of both of those. Obviously, I think that Henry Kissinger is one of the worst political figures that we've ever had in the history of the United States, but he's not particularly unique. Like, we've had a bunch of other evil motherfuckers and people who have, massive amounts of blood on their hands. I mean, George W. Bush, for example, he should be in prison for his war crimes. Obama, for example, should be in prison for his war crimes. Bill Clinton. I mean, you could basically every single U.S. president, as Noam Chomsky once said, if you actually use the standards of like the Nuremberg trials, they would be hung, right? I mean, every U.S. president, as kind of like part of the job, description, has to be a war criminal. Well, they don't have to be, but that's just kind of like what being a U.S. president, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. empire, that's kind of what comes with the job description. So I don't think that Henry Kissinger was like particularly evil per se. I mean, maybe he was a little bit, but he also was just like, this is what the U.S. war machine does. This is what the U.S. empire does. This is what it takes to run an empire like this. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying that that's a bad thing, in fact. But you guys tell me, like, where does he fall on this spectrum? Was he specifically individually evil, or was this an inevitable outgrowth of the American empire? I'll leave it up to you guys. They continue saying that what is undeniable on the occasion of his death is that millions of Argentinians, Bangladeshis, Cambodians, Chileans, East Timorese, and others cannot offer their opinion on his legacy or the world that he helped create because they died at the hands of the tyrants that Kissinger enabled. And so I want to finish off with some of this stuff down here in terms of like more specifics on, again, him signing off on some of these bombing raids, in case you aren't buying into the argument of like, well, he helped to prop up some dictators who later committed human rights abuses, so that was their fault, not his fault. Well, let's take a look at this. They say from 1969 to 1973, when a Congress that had been largely kept in the dark about the Cambodian bombing campaign tried to halt it, the United States dropped 500,000 tons of bombs on the neutral country. Kissinger personally approved each of the 3,800 Cambodia bombing raids that occurred in just a year from 1969 to 1970, according to a later Pentagon report. The bombing campaign ultimately killed between 150,000 and 500,000 Cambodian civilians, various estimates suggest. It also helped to unleash a civil war inside of Cambodia that they say killed as many as 2 million, okay? So they say Kissinger and the U.S. negotiated the Paris Peace Accords with North Vietnam in 1973, paving the way for the war's end. Some people give him credit for this, right? Well, he helped to end the war in Vietnam. Yeah, after he completely obliterated hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. Not exactly a great accomplishment. Well, maybe the Nobel Peace Prize Committee would disagree with me on that. They say it earned Kissinger a Nobel Peace Prize, and 2 prize committee members resigned in response to that. So, I mean, there you go. There's a little bit, just a surface level touch on Henry Kissinger's legacy. I'll link this down below if you want to go read the rest of it. I don't know what the fuck this picture is here that they have on my screen right now. Get better advertisement, Huffington Post. But anyways, I mean, that's Henry Kissinger for you, right? I don't want to hear any shit about how this guy was a well-respected statesman and he was doing his best at a difficult time for foreign policy decision-making in the United States. Like, no, this man has blood on his hands. Let's not do that little tap dance here. You don't need to celebrate him. You don't need to, try to give him some sort of like honorific legacy-defining, documentary or something like that. I don't want to see Obama writing any sort of like articles about his legacy or giving him a shout-out or anything like that. And so I'll just leave you with this. Okay, this was Anthony Bourdain's take on Henry Kissinger after he personally went to Cambodia and saw some of the consequences of it. He said, quote, "Once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands. You will never again be able to open a newspaper and read about that treacherous prevaricating," that's a hard word to say, Jesus Christ, treacherous, prevaricating, murderous scumbag sitting down for a nice chat with Charlie Rose or attending some black tie affair for a new glossy magazine without choking. Witness what Henry did in Cambodia, the fruits of his genius for statesmanship, and you will never understand why he's not sitting in the dock at The Hague next to Milosevic.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying